Set in a fictional version of modern-day Tokyo, Yakuza is a gritty crime drama about an ex-Yakuza trying to get by. Yakuza is a gritty crime drama about... Okay... Yakuza is a Yakuza! Okay, I give up. By now, everyone knows that Yakuza is a wacky game. Majima literally is everywhere. Bakumitai is a huge meme, and also a legitimately good song. There's that Kiryu kicking in the door gif, answering the phone, pounding a table. Oh, and people rarely mention how horny the game is. Mostly Yakuza 0, but that comes up sometimes. Lots of little jokes and memes that otherwise are well-known or semi-known, and not all of these wacky moments are side content. There is a genuinely wacky game in here with wacky characters and a wacky world. And it's realistic. It's real, it's human. This is Yakuza. But so is the lesser-known half of the series. Yakuza is a gritty crime drama about an ex-Yakuza trying to get by. A very good one. One with genuinely heart-wrenching moments. One that captivated me at nearly every moment. There are only 2 games off the top of my head I can think of that had me bawling my eyes out by the end of them. And Yakuza is one of them. And this is an otherwise normally glossed over fact of the series. For me, that was until May 29th, 2018, when YouTube creator Super Eyepatch Wolf released his Yakuza is stupid and beautiful and I love it, or Why You Should Play Yakuza. For the first time since I first really learned what Yakuza was, had I seen anyone talk about it like he does, acknowledging the memes and the wackiness, but respectfully pointing out the contradicting juxtaposition these wacky moments have next to the otherwise serious stories they depict. It's an amazing video, and probably the entire reason why I have finally taken my dive into the series. The deep dive into what really makes Yakuza the series that it is. And I recommend not watching this video. Not unless you really need a really well-written push to why you need to try the series. Having now completed Yakuza Kiwami 2, at least as of writing this paragraph, I have the realization that Yakuza is a series ideally experienced with as little knowledge as possible. You wouldn't expect that, but it's true. At least as far as where the story is concerned. Eyepatch Wolf's not afraid to show moments that are spoilers, even if they are moments you don't realize are spoilers without hindsight. And also an outright spoiler section he warns you about. I both recommend, but cannot recommend it in the slightest, for the sake of remaining as blind as possible. So let me say, turn this video off as well, and go play Yakuza for yourself. Start with Yakuza 0 before moving into the Kiwami games. There's far more to love and enjoy than just memes. And I don't want you to be spoiled any more than you might have already been. and that's why I'm choosing my clips especially carefully, at least until later in the video. I'm going to give an explicit spoiler warning when I feel like I've hit that proper point, but if this introduction isn't enough for me to convince you to go play Yakuza, I want to add a little more bait to the trap. Yakuza is a fantastic series with fantastic writing and an experience you shouldn't miss out on. Originally released on PlayStation 2 in 2005, 2006 for localization, Yakuza follows the story of Kazama Kiryu. The starting point of the series was here, and would slowly become a huge juggernaut for Sega, and propelled director Toshihiro Nagoshi into one of the heads of Sega. But this is not where we begin. We're beginning all the way in 2017 with Yakuza 0, a prequel game for the origin story of Kiryu and the ever-lovable fan-favorite Goro Majima. The game wastes little time establishing everything we need to know about the setting and all the important characters the moment we start it up. Rather than dropping you at the title screen, we're thrown right into an opening cinematic that establishes the tone of the game better than probably any other opening cinematic before or after. Beginning with alternating shots of Kiryu and Majima, giving us a meaningful look into their actions and their emotional states over the course of the game, before cutting to an unknown woman, a newspaper, and our first look over Kamurocho. Even without the rest of the cinematic, to further the setting of the 1980s Japan, all of the many characters we'll meet, and the danger of the Yakuza world, the conflicts, the pain, the drama, the first few shots backed by an awesome theme track hooked me immediately. Starting the game for real, we get a full introduction to Kiryu, to his life, and to Kamurocho. I'll come back to the story stuff later, but for now he's just a small-time Yakuza doing simple jobs and taking care of street punks. This last bit is our introduction to combat, a simple, fluid, and complex system. You have a light attack and a heavy attack, which is more a combo finisher. Additionally, we have a grab, a dodge, and a block. Simple stuff, it's a brawler. But the game goes so much beyond just simple brawling. First, we have the heat system. By fighting, we generate heat, but it's not just by hitting enemies that generates heat. Blocking can generate heat, dodging an attack can generate heat, but we can just lose heat by not generating any for a while, getting hit, or using a heat action. Powerful, cinematic attacks that make your enemy really feel the pain. The game accounts for their power by putting penalties on spamming heat actions over and over, so you have to choose when and if you use a heat action. On top of that, heat is also a boost to your attack speed, so now it's a risk-reward system. Do you be greedy and go all in on a big combo and heat actions? Do you keep high heat so your normal attacks are more effective? Or are you having trouble on a fight and can't keep your heat up, and it's better spamming whatever heat you can get into free damage, even if the damage is going to drop off quickly? These are thoughts that went through my mind over and over as I played, especially in the intense boss encounters. Anytime I got greedy, the game was happy to punish me and rob me of all of my heat I just built up. Some fights I just struggled with, so all of my heat I just funneled into every heat action I could. Other fights, I never touched heat actions once. There's a flexibility and flow to combat that changes with every encounter. And this carries over when you swap over to Majima too, with his own moveset, own heat actions, and so on. Even though the main flow of the combos are the same between both characters, their specific attacks completely feel different. But it doesn't end there. You don't just have one moveset, you have 3 for each character. Within the first 2 chapters of each character, you get additional styles. Kiryu has Brawler, Rush, and Beast styles, while Majima has Thug, Breaker, and Slugger styles. And even though each is analogous to each other, they all play completely differently. Even when he's cutting loose, Kiryu's styles feel like a stiff board, rigid, but attacks that flow seamlessly together, while Majima's styles all feel like untamed beasts, wild, uncontrollable, and all over the place. Yet you have full control over this wildness, without ever telling you when or where to use any style. You are given free reign to figure it out for yourself. Maybe you fall into using Rush for all boss encounters and Brawler for all Mook encounters. Or maybe you'll fall into the rhythm of the battle system so well you recognize when and where to use a different style for a specific encounter, or even specific parts of encounters. I feel like both characters have specific bosses that prove this ideal really well, and it's likely on purpose. Tests of using all of your styles, and if you try to brute force it using only one style, you will struggle. Struggle, but not lose. The game, even at its hardest points, gives you plenty of room to learn, adjust, and try again without having to load a save. Even when you die, you can just retry from the start of an encounter. The game is putting its every effort into your corner, from warning you before you start a mission to giving you plenty of leeway within those missions. And the game never expects you to be this super good player, except in the optional super bosses and endgame content. Some encounters get pretty difficult, but spamming healing items is a viable strategy. But also, I played on normal and hard modes, depending on my mood. There's an easy mode there for anyone who might struggle. Though, nitpick here, I hate it when in games, if you die multiple times in a row, it will ask you to lower the difficulty. No game, if I want to lower the difficulty, I'll do it myself. But back to what I was saying. So not only are there a ton of viable playstyles, there's room for players of all different skill levels to enjoy the game. And I'm still completely ignoring there's a 4th style of combat, the Legend style. We'll come back to this later, but this has been a long tangent when I wanted to go through the beginning of the game and how the game ties things together. But okay, we beat up some thugs, and our oath brother Nishiki steps in and takes Kiryu away. We talk a bit, walk a bit, and run into a pair of drunkards to introduce us to the heat system itself. If it wasn't clear in previous clips, the game is extremely visceral. Every heat action has Kiryu dishing out some extreme brutality. The base gameplay is satisfying on its own, but the game tries to incentivize you to use heat actions by making them these cool explosions of violence that make you wonder what Kiryu will do next to their opponents. It's just unfortunate that they start getting stale after a while, even when you mix it up. But also you can turn down blood to make things a little less extreme. Just don't expect the cutscenes to account for this. But you can rest easy knowing Kiryu will never kill a man. Non-lethal explosions. Anyway, Kiryu tries to move on before we're introduced to the skill system. And while as a literal concept none of it makes sense, this is tied into gameplay and the world too. It's established that Japan is in an economic bubble. Everyone is rich, and you will be no exception. But rather than buying gaudy clothes or anything else you might do in other lesser open world games, you literally invest it into yourself. I honestly really like this for two reasons. For one, like I said, it ties it into the actual game canon. Money is literally more common than water. Enemies explode into money when you defeat them. So it makes so much sense for money to be what literally everything boils down to. For two, it gives you control on how you build Kiryu and Majima. If the game didn't have some sort of progression system, you'd have all of your abilities at once, and that's just too much. Look at all of the unlocks across each tree that are ability unlocks. Imagine starting the game with all of them. Most people would never use half of the abilities or even try them once. It'd be too much to handle, and people would miss out on beautiful skills like Tiger Drop. And because you invested the money into that skill, you feel compelled to try it out at least once. If the progression system was tied to story progress or something, you don't get to build and invest in what you want, or what's in the way of what you want, and will have to try out just because you're forced to get it. I personally don't ever use Brawler Kiryu. I prefer Rush and Beast. If the game said, hey, here's a bunch of upgrades for Brawler style, I'd be annoyed because I just got upgrades I'll never use. This would also not account for stuff like HP upgrade pacing and the post-game upgrading you'll do. So instead, it's put into your hands. You can invest in each tree how you decide. Go all in on one style, spread out your investments, bum rush HP upgrades, ignore HP upgrades entirely for abilities and attack boosts. You can build Kiryu however you want, provided you have the money. And since money is so prominent, getting money isn't the hardest thing in the world. Especially when we get into some things later. Point is, I really like it when character builds are put in the player's hands, especially when they make sense. But moving on now, Nishiki continues to drag us further until we reach our destination finally. A karaoke bar. This is only the beginning, but all of the wacky stuff, the memes, they're not just side content. They're not just jokes for the sake of comedy. This is an actual part of Kiryu's personality and hobbies. He actually is the kind of guy to belt a few out, or go bowling, or go to telephone clubs, or become a real estate agent and cabaret club manager. Man of many talents. But seriously, all the weird events, all of the wacky stuff you get into, they are canonical to the kind of people Kiryu and Majima are. He might be a bit awkward at times, but for a Yakuza, he's a really, really good guy, as is Majima. They have their own goals, sometimes direly so, but they can take the time to help out a kid who's worried about his girlfriend, play with toy cars, get accosted by an Obitarian, literally single-handedly ruin Japan's economy, and everything else. And that's what makes this series so wonderful as a story. You are not just following the story of the Tojo clan and how these two men fit into everything as Yakuza. You're following the stories of Kamurocho and Sotenbori as a whole. The world feels like it's living and breathing. Even as so many things change, others stay the same. When you meet someone for a second time, you remember them because of the impression they left on you. Of course, it's not always so smooth. Sometimes it's a bit more obvious, but a number of times I recognized the character long before Kiryu, if he ever recognized them. For as dark and gritty as the story truly is, for as serious as Kiryu tries to make himself out to be, both he and Majima both are fucking giant nerds. They have hearts of gold no matter what the story forces upon them, no matter how many people they're forced to take out, non-lethally of course, no matter what struggles they go through, they're gentle souls and giant nerds. And this is consistent. But I'll leave it with that. I'll save the rest of this for the big spoily section of the story. But let's skip forward ahead a bit more until after Kiryu visits Dojima headquarters. This is when you get introduced to your second style, Rush. You give him the short tutorial to try it out, and then you let go to explore all of Kamurocho. And this is where I would say Yakuza's biggest strength shines, where a game like GTA goes for these massive, overwhelming open worlds with nothing in them, except for the sheer size. Yakuza goes for the exact opposite. Kamurocho is tiny by comparison. 24 streets make up the whole of Kamurocho, and Sotenbori is less than half of that. And yet these towns feel huge. You can't walk more than a few feet with something to look at. Back alley mahjong parlors, ramen shops, bars, arcades, one of the many Popo convenience stores dotting the towns, and so much else. Side stories, telephone cards to find, people to save from thugs for a reward. There isn't a single street with at least something on it to find. Kamurocho is tiny and yet so huge. Small enough that when the game gives me a road where I need to go, I know what road they're talking about. I don't even know half the streets in my own real-life town, and yet it's huge enough that it remains impressive and feels like you've never run out of things to see and do. I know this town. I feel like I actually live here. The people, the places, the hangouts. This is my town. I care as much about Kamurocho as Kiryu does. Think about it. Can you remember anything about the last open world you explored? Fallout. I mean, I guess there were biomes here and there. I remember some tall buildings in Boston. GTA? Last one I went all in on was San Andreas, and even Kid Me never knew where he was after a few hundred hours of play. I remember Big Smoke's order though. I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda. These worlds are just too big and too bland. Yakuza prefers to have these small, expertly crafted places that actually feel alive, filled with activities the character would themselves partake in, not just because the player wanted to. People the characters would go out of their way to help. So much love has gone into creating a cohesive world of immense size in feel alone, that never contradicts the character you are playing. But okay, we keep going, we explore the town, play minigames, meet tons of main and side characters, get our third style, repeat with Majima and Sotenbori, and have a glorious time. Every individual sub-story is made memorable in one way or another. Every side activity given intuitive, if sometimes flawed gameplay, and they're fun. They're often amazing and worth spending hours exploring the town for. But something I started doing more and more as the games got deeper and deeper into the stories, I started doing the side content less and less. Not because I wanted to ignore the side content, not because it was bad or I didn't like it, but because the story had gotten its claws that deep into me. I wanted to know what was coming next. I wanted to run the cabaret club a couple times, but what was going to happen to Majima next? How was Kiryu going to get out of the situation he found himself in? What is going to happen? I want to know. Open world games usually fall into some kind of trap of making the story hot garbage, while the side content is where it's at. Basically every modern Bethesda game falling neatly into this category. But for as genuinely entertaining most of the minigames were for me, how funny and interesting most of the sub-stories were, the story was pulling me in. I wanted to know. I needed to know. I think once I hit Chapter 7 in Yakuza 0, I entirely stopped doing side content. I couldn't stop for them unless I literally ran into them when traveling to the next story marker. I could not stop myself from rushing the rest of the story. And ironically, despite having what is probably both my favorite story and gameplay, Yakuza Kiwami 2 was by far the one I spent the most time trying to get every sub-story complete as they unlocked. Though that may be thanks to the addition of a sub-story finder function for your map. Point is, the stories of these games are amazing, even if I can't go into them until the spoiler section. And by now, I hope I've already convinced you to try this series already. But if I haven't, let me go over Yakuza Kiwami and Kiwami 2. Yakuza Kiwami is definitely the low point of these games, but it's still a very good and very necessary chapter in the Kiryu saga. Booting up the game, we're shown an opener that's not quite as good as Yakuza 0's, but is trying to do something a bit different with its opener. I won't be mentioning what besides saying it includes a lot of Kiryu beating people up and music I don't like as much as the Yakuza 0 opening music. Keep this in mind for the spoiler section though. Yakuza Kiwami takes place 17 years after the events of 0, and I would say, despite being the low point of the 3 games within this video, does some very clever things. In the intro of the game, you're given control of a full power Kiryu, a preview of the power you are capable of obtaining by the end of the game while using the Legend style. In Yakuza 0, I had no real reason to use the Legend style since it's basically a post-game kind of reward. In Kiwami, you're given a hyper-strong preview of what kind of damage you are capable of putting out, while keeping your access to Brawler, Rush, and Beast styles. But then the story kicks into full gear and your power is reset. There's a reason some games like Metroid have short sections of what abilities you will get before you get fully reset. It's to get you looking forward to what's to come, an idea of what you are capable of, and even if you played 0, like you should before playing this one, this is an effective tactic. By the end of Kiwami, and especially during the post-game content, I spent most of my time in Legend style, where in 0, I hated it. It was just too slow and not all that strong. But as I said, you're reset now, and given a path to regaining your power in 2 systems. The progression system is no longer money-based, but EXP-based. The economic bubble has burst, so we needed a new way to level up, if a bit bland thematically. Defeating enemies gives EXP, and story encounters gives you huge chunks of EXP, to the point that optional encounters are pretty pointless even in the early game, except for one specific example, but overall the system is basically the same. Though, the different trees have also changed. Rather than a tree for each style, the Beast tree is now all about HP buffs, Brawletry is now all about heat actions for all 3 styles, and the Rush Tree is all about abilities for all 3 styles. However, what is interesting here is the 4th skill tree, the Legend Tree. EXP cannot be used here. Instead, you have to fight Majima a couple dozen times. After 0, you'll be used to fighting the same boss over and over between a certain story character and Mr. Shakedown. And I like how the first boss of Kiwami is literally just Mr. Shakedown. But now it's far more impactful. He's outright trying to train you along with Komaki's line of skills. Go get Tiger Drop as soon as possible. Into being a killing machine. Majima Everywhere isn't just some joke Yakuza fans find funny, though it is hilarious. It's both extremely in character and a full experience in of itself. You go from just running into Majima in the streets and trying to avoid him, to being literally ambushed in the middle of the street, or from the sewers. He even starts attacking you in minigames, though that usually isn't a fight, just a match in whatever minigame you're doing. He's both something you want to avoid, and something to come across over and over again. He unlocks immense power that may even become your main style after the introduction teased you so hard to the point you chase him down. Or you might avoid him at every single point you can after you get tired of fighting him, to the point of not going down specific streets because you know this is a common hiding place for Majima. Which ties right back into the world design. You are now paying even more attention to every little detail of Kamurocho than before. There's a manhole cover there. Do you risk passing by it, or do you take a detour? There's a car he might be hiding behind. Take a wide berth so he can't ambush you. He's right there in front of you. Run for it! The knowledge of how to get around town, which street is where each shop is, now morphs and merges with how to avoid Majima's hiding spots. All of this sounds so amazing, and it is, but let me quickly just list out why I say this is the low point of the series. The story's gameplay itself often involves points of filler walking. The moments in Yakuza 0 that were quote-unquote filler walking often had a real purpose to it. Real development of the story and the people in it. Kiwami 2 also does a bit of this, but not nearly as bad as how it feels to me in Kiwami 1. The story is also a bit less tight than it was in 0. 0 is actually the 6th game in the main line, with 1 or 2 side games. That makes Yakuza 6 the 7th game in line, and Like a Dragon, what everyone calls Yakuza 7, to be the 8th in the series. I only bring this up to say, I forgive both Kiwami games for their faults and the story end, because as far as I can tell, they're the exact same as the original PS2 games. These were made so long ago, and only the gameplay and systems were updated, not the story and pacing. And thirdly, problems-wise, I don't know. Kiwami just feels like it doesn't feel as smooth to me. I don't know what it is. Kiwami was actually made after Yakuza 0 and is on the same engine, which is super obvious through the whole game. Yet it feels like they accidentally adjusted a thing or three to make the combat worse. They also took out the risk-reward system with heat. It no longer speeds you up, it's just for heat actions and similar actions. Instead we have climax heat, which is just a fancy way of making the more useful high heat actions from 0 harder to use. It's no wonder that in Kiwami 2 they made all heat actions just need 1 bar of heat at any heat level. And the boss design in this game is also terrible. There's a couple of annoying bosses in 2 that lean on the bad side, but nothing like here. They're just frustrating, too much super armor, even compared to Zero bosses, and in general plain frustrating design. Oh, and there's that one weird mechanic when enemies start to regen HP? Spoilers, the final boss will use this and the only counter is the legend style, which means the game outright expects you to grind out Majima encounters if you didn't fight him to unlock the counter attack. Yes, the counter attacks are actually unlocks, and the first boss, I didn't even have the ability to use the counters on the normal styles because I invested my EXP in other things, not realizing this was a skill I had to re-earn, which is a bit shit. But that's about most of what I want to say on Kiwami for now. Most of what I want to say is actually during the spoiler section. This game does a lot right, even if it is the worst by a wide margin. At best, it's more of the same as Yakuza 0, but with only Kiryu playable, no Sotenbori, and a few other small but sometimes significant differences. One of those significant differences, though, I want to set the stage for when we move into Kiwami 2. As I said, Kiwami takes place a massive 17 years after the events of Yakuza 0. A few streets have changed, some stores and minigames moved or removed entirely, and a major new addition in the center of town. But overall, I know Kamurocho. I know every little road, every shop, even every little hiding spot for Majima. But, okay, this isn't the major spoiler section, but this little thing left such a huge impression on me that I'm putting a little spoiler warning here. Kiwami 2 is that significant to me, and I think might even be my absolute favorite of the three games in every way. Go play through Kiwami 2, play these games please, they're amazing. But okay, you've been warned. So, I know Kamurocho, I know every street, I know where Taitei is, Senryo, Park Boulevard. And then I opened Yakuza Kiwami 2. There's no opener this time, but this game too is doing something specific that we'll come back to as well. I get into the tutorial section and it's immediately obvious the graphics have been upgraded into Kiwami 2. I go through the tutorial, I get to Kamurocho, and I don't know Kamurocho anymore. I'm not usually one to care about graphics all too much. As long as they don't take away from the game, it's fine. But when I stepped back into Kamurocho, I was left speechless. It's clear, even in Yakuza 0 and Kiwami, that the town is blindingly bright at night. But it was just more game graphics to me. It's not until Kiwami 2 that it all truly hit me. The light reflecting off the puddles in the street, every sign radiating with many times the intensity of the previous games. I felt like I had to escape to a side street just not to go blind. Even in the alleyways, though, the light bled through and it was only a momentary respite. There's like double or triple the number of people regularly walking around town. Cars actually now drive through town, though only on one road. You can go through some buildings now, with one leading to an underground restaurant, and onto some roofs. And doors are no longer loading screens, it's all completely seamless, with one or two exceptions for obvious reasons. Fighting with random thugs in the street, you can actually damage property. If you throw an enemy into the window of a shop, that window will shatter and the people running the counter will actually get pissed at you and refuse to serve you. Enemies will even chase you into said stores, ensuring that you wreck the place. I was already willing to call Kamurocho and Sotenbori the best open worlds ever designed. But then Kiwami 2 took things a step beyond and visually floored me. And like I said, normally I don't care about the visuals of games besides saying, this looks nice. That's why I went as far as warning about spoilers for this of all things. It hit me that hard. And it doesn't end there either, as the gameplay is on its own other level too. The combat has both been simplified and expanded upon immensely. Rather than having 4 styles, you have one that seems to be a mix of the Brawler and Legend styles. Style selection is now weapon selection, allowing you to equip 3 weapons at once. You can also steal weapons and store them for later, with most story encounters having a bunch of weapons lying around to take. There's a lot more emphasis on using weapons now, and they are extremely strong, especially if you go for full completion of sub-stories and get a sword that has infinite uses. I did my Legend mode playthrough as if I was playing No More Heroes. But you don't have to use weapons a ton, even if it's recommended. And despite removing your options for styles, you still have plenty of options in your one given style. The gameplay is smoother than ever. Every ability is usable at all times rather than being part of specific styles. Throwing is way more useful an ability than before, working as an area of effect and something you can combo into. It's crowd control anytime you need it. I went from not liking Brawler or Legend style to using exclusively Legend in the endgame of Yakuza Kiwami to now actually enjoying the Brawler style as a whole. I do miss the mobility of Rush style though. You can only chain together 2 dodges in this game. You can get a third, but that's after beating the super bosses. The annoying recharge mechanic from Kiwami has also been removed, and instead turned into a huge bombastic finishing move with no penalty for bosses. Just catharsis and brutality. And whoo boy, this game takes the brutality up several notches. Remember, Kiryu has never killed a man. See? There he is now. In Kiwami 1, they also started adding special power-up moves available at max heat. I guess that's what they turned the risk-reward system into? They're pretty late game though, so by the time you get to them, you're probably in a groove with how you deal with combat, and that makes learning all of them a bit rougher. But in Kiwami 2, this is given to you extremely early on, and heavily implied something you should get when even the main story is saying to go get it. But it's also extremely powerful, especially if you're a good button masher or QTE player. While an average health bar is much less HP than an enemy in Yakuza 0 or 1, the heat actions in your Super Saiyan state can take out 2 or even 3 whole health bars. They're insanely powerful. And you can still Tiger Drop. The EXP system is also entirely overhauled to be the best of the 3, I'd say. Rather than one type of EXP, there's 5 types with their own specialties, and you typically earn all the types at once. But you can eat specific foods for large amounts of EXP in the types you want. Need a lot of power EXP so you can get more moves, eat a lot of power food anytime you go for meals, and it's actually useful amounts of EXP, where in Kiwami 1, it never added up. So to put it simply, after a short hump in Yakuza Kiwami, Yakuza 2 has what I would say is the best gameplay design of all 3. at least the main gameplay. The weird tower defense minigame is kinda bad. But the brawling is the greatest of all the games up to this point. It still has some hiccups in the main story's gameplay, but it's worth it for the fights themselves are extremely fun and some of the best. And there's so much more I could say about all the different aspects of all three of these games. I didn't mention the completion lists and how those affect the games. I didn't actually talk about the Cabaret Club minigame in depth, which is an entire page in itself, maybe two. I didn't talk about getting drunk and the fun bit how in Kiwami 2 it actually affects your controls. I could spend another whole page talking about the amazing music these games have. There is so much I could talk about, but this is already a very long video and I want to let everyone experience the series for themselves and make their own decisions. But I started this video talking about how wacky the game is, but also how this is a genuine, serious crime drama with real heart. And this is where that spoiler warning has to come in, because I want to really dive into the story and the depth of what is shown to us. I might jump around between all three games, so be warned, but I will try to keep it as linear as possible. But I will be spoiling the ending to this trilogy. So please, go play these games instead. My analysis matters little in the grand scheme of things when you can come to your own conclusions. I'll repeat what I said at the start. This game is best experienced blind. But what the games do and say, well, here's my little part of what is so notable about the story and this series. I have written and rewritten this section many times already, because there is so much I want to talk about within the plot of all three games, and it's only 3 games. There's 5 more Yakuza games after these within the main line. Analyzing the plot of Yakuza 0 alone, leaving out 75% of the events, characters, and things I want to talk about, took an entire page alone. The video up to this point took 9 pages alone for reference. So instead, I'm going to talk about a number of major plot points in short order based on the main theme I constantly saw, and probably extrapolate and summarize far too much anyway. I'm also going to focus on Kiryu's story since, even if he appears in all 3 games, Majima's story is almost entirely within Yakuza 0. Just know that many of the same things can be said about Majima, at least before he becomes the Mad Dog of Shimano. The main thing I keep coming back to is the selflessness Kiryu constantly shows in the series. This includes all of the sub-stories, but goes especially so for the main stories. In Yakuza 0, he's fighting not for himself, but for his adoptive father, Shintaro Kazama. He joined the Yakuza because of Kazuma, and holds no small amount of respect for the man. Despite the looming threat of jail time, his thoughts constantly drift towards Kazuma and protecting those closest to him, like Oath Brother Akira Nishikiyama. Nishiki is especially important as he comes closest to ending Kiryu's life in Yakuza 0, but not out of anger or for a reward, but to protect Kiryu from much worse. We see in Majima's story just how bad things can get for enemies of the Tojo clan. Kiryu would be erased from history while spending years being tortured. The two would die for each other as Oath Brothers. Nishiki would kill Kiryu before letting him fall prey to the clan. And Kiryu would frame himself for murder. Over the next 7 years after clearing his name, Kiryu climbs the ranks of the Dojima family and begins to fall for a young woman named Yumi, an old friend of the two brothers from their time in the orphanage. But when Dojima harms Yumi, Nishiki loses it and becomes a murderer, shooting Dojima dead. The man who convinces Kiryu not to murder in Yakuza 0 becomes a patriarch killer himself. But Kiryu sends him and Yumi away, taking the fall himself, and receives a 10-year prison sentence. Right before becoming patriarch of the Kiryu family, he trades his life for that of his brother. He goes from one of the most respected men in the entire clan to a pariah. Everyone wants him dead for killing Dojima. He loses the chance at his own family, his years of hard work, everything, all to protect Nishiki. And while he is gone to prison, Yumi goes missing. Nishiki goes mad and becomes a ruthless leader in the clan, and upon his release, the third chairman of the Tojo clan is murdered. Kiryu enters the fray once more to find Yumi, figure out what happened to Nishiki, and save the Tojo clan, now at the brink of collapse. While there is some actual selfish motivation this time around, wanting to find Yumi, it becomes clear by the end of the game he could leave it if it was all just for himself. Along the way, he discovers Haruka, a young girl who turns out to be the daughter of Yumi. To find Yumi and to protect Haruka, he becomes her protector. Her adoptive father, much like Kazama was his. But this all goes out the window in the final chapters of the game. Kazama is slain and reveals to Kiryu that Sunflower is an orphanage of the children of parents he murdered, including Kiryu's. The man he became a Yakuza because of, the man he fought to protect, the man he looked up to more than anything in the world, was a monster. He loses his father, and the man he saw his father as. Not just Kazuma, though, but friends Reina and Shinji also die in the journey. Then, the love of his life, Yumi, is shot. And finally, Nishiki kills himself to atone for the monster he himself has become over the last 10 years. Everyone Kiryu knew and loved is now gone. Everyone he fought to protect is gone. He failed. He has nobody left to live for. And especially not even himself. He is ready to go back to jail for the events that have transpired. He is done. But he does have someone to live for. Over the course of the story and protecting her, Kiryu and Haruka become closer and closer. Had Yumi lived, he would have become her stepfather. So, he has to keep going. Not for himself, but for Haruka. He has to be her Uncle Kaz. And so, as fourth chairman of the Tojo clan, he resigns. He leaves the clan in the hands of someone he believes will be able to guide the Tojo clan into better days, while he goes to be a proper father to Haruka. You see what I mean, though? No matter what happens to him, no matter how low he falls, he is fighting for the future of those around him. His own future is hardly one worth caring about. This will come to a head at the end of Yakuza 2. But still, the events of Yakuza 1 haunt him. Even a year later, Kazuma's confession and subsequent death, along with the deaths of Reina, Shinji, Yumi, and Nishiki all weigh heavy on his conscience, plagued with nightmares. But through it all, Haruka is growing up right. But this has to be put on hold when the 5th chairman, Terada, is murdered right in front of Kiryu. Kira returns to the Tojo clan at the behest of Terada, and perhaps no small amount of guilt for his part in their current predicament. An invasion of the Omi Alliance is on the way. The secretive Jingwan Mafia is in the shadows, and there are even enemies from within. Things are looking bleak. And then enters Kaoru Sayama of Osaka's 4th Division Police Force. Initially entering her protective custody, Kiryu begins to fight for her as well, even if it's obvious she can take care of herself. The two quickly fall for one another, and both start hiding things in vain attempts to protect the other. During the events of the story, Ryuji Goda teaches Kiryu to be selfish for once in his life, but not directly. The two butt heads almost immediately, with Kiryu as the Dragon of Dojima and Goda the Dragon of Kansai. At the end of Yakuza 0, Shibusawa says there can only be one Dragon of Dojima. Now Goda proposes there can only be one dragon, period. And despite the reveal that Sayama and Goda are siblings, he and Kiryu are destined to fight. Their dragon tattoos are their souls. And for what may be for the first time in his life, Kiryu makes the selfish decision to battle Goda, against the wishes of Sayama. Even when Goda is defeated, the rest of the twists of the story unfolded, and a bomb about to take them all out, the two continue to be selfish, both bleeding out, on the verge of death, and a literal clock ticking down. The two once again forsake Sayama's wishes. Their destinies are still calling, for one last battle to the death, while an elevator carries Sayama to safety. But Sayama makes her own choices. She fights against the fate of sitting by while everyone she loves dies, and returns to the Twin Dragons in time for the aftermath of the battle. In Yakuza Kiwami, Kiryu watches everyone he loves die. In Yakuza 2, Kiryu warned Sayama to stop searching for her identity for what might be uncovered, knowing what pain might lurk ahead. He opens himself up to her, exposes his inner turmoil to protect her, but she continues and goes through many of the same trials. Those she trusts betray her. Those she loves are put in danger and die. Her father dies within minutes of learning his identity, and now her brother is dying in her arms. She was given her shot to avoid pain, but she chose her destiny herself. And up till now, Kiryu has been following his, as the Dragon of Dojima. The battles before and after this are his destiny. And that's when he finally collapses, unable to move after the strain the battles have put on him. His destiny is at its end. Unable to carry Kiryu away from the bomb, Kaoru is left with two choices. Leave the man she loves to die after losing her father and brother, or stay and die with him. To live for him, or to die with him. Rather than letting destiny choose for them, they both seize their own destinies, choosing to die together. A man does this scene hurt me. Let's rewind a bit. At the end there, I began to talk about destiny and the soul, and one of the major themes of Yakuza 2 especially, and the real-life Yakuza, is their tattoos. The tattoos they get represent them, their personalities, their morals, and their destinies. The dragons of Shibusawa, Goda, and Kiryu are all at odds because of what they represent, of who they represent. This is why in the climactic battles, a battle of ideals more than of fists, the two opponents bear their tattoos against each other. Dragons are often a show of strength and nobility, which suits Kiryu masterfully, constantly proving himself to be the strongest man around, a legendary Yakuza, the Dragon of Dojima. So it's only natural that the most noble, the most powerful dragon would be sought out, to be crushed by the rival dragon of Kansai. Let's rewind a bit more to the end of Yakuza Kiwami, the fight against little Aniki Nishikiyama. His tattoo is that of a bright red koi, which typically represents strength and bravery. But more importantly is the story behind the koi. Not only was Goda a dragon, not only was Shibusawa a dragon, but younger brother Nishiki, too, was a dragon. There can only be one dragon, though. And in the 10 years since Kiryu took the fall for the murder of Dojima, Nishiki has swam through the Dragon's Gate to become a dragon of his own. Now let's rewind some more, past Shibusawa, to Daisaku Kuze. The man is an absolute unit, a badass through and through. In the first two fights against Kiryu, Kuze bears his tattoo, Enma the Judge. Enma decides whether souls go to heaven or hell. He returns again and again to judge Kiryu. I want to end with him because not only is he a badass, one who refuses to give up no matter how many times you beat him down, but because of how thematically perfect he is. Apparently, one of the criticisms Yakuza 0 gets is the fact that Kuze is 5 of the boss fights of the main story. He is the first boss, but also the penultimate boss. His first boss theme is called Pledge of Demon, and the theme that plays during his final fight is Oath of Enma. He judges you over and over and over again, slowly gaining a begrudging respect for you, until finally he tests you with every last ounce of strength he has, testing the new legend among all Yakuza. He is growing old. The journey laid out by the Enma on his back is coming to a close. He must forge the new era of Yakuza. He must forge the Dragon of Dojima. Kuze is possibly the greatest villain in all of Yakuza, his actions, his personality, the tattoo, and everything matches who Kuze is. And the developers put thought into every little bit of these characters, their desires, personalities, and the destinies their tattoos lay out for them. It's just masterful how much thought is to put into all of it. And there is so much I am glossing over too. So many little elements that matter to the full scheme of what makes Yakuza so great. So many little emotional moments, payoffs, surprises. Like, the reason there's this wacky scene with a cartoon castle shell opening to a real castle? The reason this happens genuinely shocked and outright angered me. Not because it was badly written, but because the games are written so well, the characters so memorable, I was completely and totally invested emotionally. And there are so many emotional moments. The ending of Kiwami 2 means nothing without all of the emotional moments leading up to it. Everything Haruka is forced to go through, Pochitaro existing at all. And then the added Majima chapters for Kiwami 2 had me bawling at the end. I'll leave you to experience that on your own, but for a 2-hour mini-story, it hit me harder than anything else. And there's so many moments, so many little things, so many little touches. I just can't go over them all, but I hope you will experience them for yourself. On January 28th, 2021, the day this video releases, the Yakuza collection with Yakuza 3 through 5 is coming to PC. Then come March, Yakuza 6, Song of Life, will join them. I haven't played them, I don't know what happens in them. All I know is Yakuza 6 has been sold to me as the best in the series by a couple people. And this is what I consider the second story of Yakuza as someone who has only played up through Kiwami 2. If there's want and desire from the audience, I will do a part 2 and cover those games. Maybe even a part 3 for Song of Life. But till then, I implore you, if you've somehow not played Yakuza yet, even if you've watched through all of this video, even the spoiler section, the story still has so much you've not seen, so much more to love and get emotional over, so much fun to be had. Please play Yakuza. Give it a chance. I don't make videos about random other games or game series for no reason. Yakuza has left such a huge impression on me. From the small little sub-stories to the major story twists, to the bombastic combat, everything has a level of pure love put into it. Just don't bother with Mahjong unless you're good at it. But fuck! Thank you to my patrons for giving me the opportunity to make videos like this. I know it's probably not the most desired content from me, being a Final Fantasy channel, but I really, really wanted to do this. And an extra special thanks to Arya Deva, Ethan Olsen, Jamie Cotterill, Kathy Knock, Kyle Steinhauser, Malfi, and Valor LLC. If you'd like to become one of my patrons, the link is down in the description. Thank you for watching, and may the power of the Dragon of Dojima lay waste to your enemies.